$3.7 trillion. That is India's projected GDP by 2026, according to the IMF's World Economic Outlook. Let that land for a moment. $3.7 trillion, the fifth largest economy on the planet. And here is what the mainstream headlines are not telling you. Within that single national number, hidden inside India's federal architecture, individual Indian states are on the verge of crossing the $1 trillion economic threshold. Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat. These are not regions. These are emerging macroeconomic zones, each the size of a mid-tier global economy. The question is not if they cross the trillion-dollar mark. The question, the one every strategic investor, every policy architect, every global CEO is asking in 2026, is when, and what happens to the global order when they do. Stay with me, because the exact timeline, the data, the drivers, the second-order disruptions, is what we are breaking down today. To understand where India is going, you have to understand where it has been. In 1991, India's total GDP was approximately $270 billion. It was a nation undergoing a traumatic structural recalibration, a balance of payments crisis that forced the hand of then Finance Minister Manmohan Singh. What came out of that crisis was not just an economic reform package, it was the structural unlocking of a civilization-scale economic engine. Liberalization, privatization, globalization, the three pillars of 1991. Fast forward to 2001, India's GDP had grown to roughly $490 billion. The IT boom was creating a new knowledge economy class. Bangalore was emerging as a global technology node. The outsourcing revolution was beginning its structural embedding in the world's corporate supply chains. By 2014, India crossed the $2 trillion mark, and the velocity of growth was no longer incremental, it was exponential. Now consider this architectural reality. India is not a monolithic economy. It is a federal union of 28 states and 8 union territories, each operating with its own industrial policy, investment climate, and demographic trajectory. This is the insight that global analysts consistently miss. When they model India's growth, they aggregate. But the real strategic intelligence is in the disaggregation, because what is happening at the state level, inside Maharashtra, inside Karnataka, inside Tamil Nadu, is not a reflection of national GDP. It is the precursor to the next phase of global economic reordering. Let us go to the data. As of 2024-25, Maharashtra's GSDP, gross state domestic product, stood at approximately $480 billion. It is India's financial capital, its entertainment capital, and its industrial heartland in one. Karnataka is at approximately $280 billion, home to Bengaluru, one of the world's top 5 technology clusters. The World Bank has identified Bengaluru's innovation density as comparable to Silicon Valley in terms of startup formation velocity. Tamil Nadu sits at approximately $300 billion. The state is India's premier automobile manufacturing hub, home to Ford, Hyundai, BMW, and Renault-Nissan manufacturing operations. Gujarat, the state that produced Tata, Ambani, and Adani, is at approximately $310 billion. The Gujarat International Finance Tech City, Gift City, is being positioned as India's answer to Singapore's financial architecture. And then there is Uttar Pradesh, 240 million people, a GSDP approaching $240 billion and the fastest growth trajectory among India's major states. UP's growth rate under current policy architecture has been consistently outpacing the national average. This is not a developing region, this is a structural realignment in progress. If you value data-driven analysis over mainstream narratives, if you want to understand the forces reshaping the global economic order before the headlines catch up, then join our community of strategic thinkers. Hit subscribe, enable notifications, and stay ahead of the global shift. Because what we are about to show you next is the exact timeline, state by state, that the institutional forecasters have been systematically underreporting. To understand why this is a turning point, we have to look at the data they missed. The $1 trillion threshold is not merely a numerical milestone, it is a geopolitical event, and it is closer than anyone in the Western financial press is willing to admit. Let us start with the frontrunner. Maharashtra is the structural inevitability of India's state-level trillion-dollar race. Mumbai alone contributes approximately 6.16% of India's total GDP. It houses the Bombay Stock Exchange, Asia's oldest, the National Stock Exchange, the world's largest by contract volume, and the Reserve Bank of India, the monetary anchor of a $3.7 trillion economy. Maharashtra's industrial corridor, the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, and the Mumbai-Pune economic zone is the single most capital-intensive infrastructure project in Asia outside of China's Belt and Road. Our projection, cross-referenced against IMF growth rates, Maharashtra government data, and independent economic modeling, Maharashtra crosses $1 trillion GSDP by 2027 to 28, potentially earlier if the Dharavi redevelopment and the Navi Mumbai airport become fully operational. This is not optimism. This is trajectory calculus. Tamil Nadu and Karnataka represent something structurally unique in global economics. They are a dual-engine zone, one state anchored in advanced manufacturing, the other in high-value technology services, operating in geographic proximity, with shared talent pipelines and complementary capital flows. Tamil Nadu's automotive exports alone exceeded $7 billion in 2023-24. The state's electronics manufacturing sector, catalyzed by Apple's decision to expand iPhone production through Foxconn and Tata Electronics in the Chennai region, is on a structural inflection point. Apple's India manufacturing bet is not a hedge. It is a strategic reorientation of a global supply chain that was previously locked into a single-nation dependency. Karnataka's trajectory is anchored in the most durable economic asset of the 21st century, intellectual capital density. Bengaluru produces more software engineers per capita than any city outside the United States. Its startup ecosystem generated over $7 billion in venture capital inflows in 2023. Our timeline: Tamil Nadu approaches $1 trillion by 2030-31. Karnataka, driven by services rather than manufacturing, hits the threshold by 2032-33, unless the current semiconductor investment pipeline accelerates beyond current projections. Gujarat is a case study in what happens when you combine industrial policy discipline, entrepreneurial culture, and strategic port infrastructure. The Mundra port, operated by Adani Ports and Special Economic Zone, is the largest commercial port in India. It handles over 155 million metric tons annually. That is not a port. That is a macroeconomic lever. Gift City, the Gujarat International Finance Tech City, is India's first operational smart city and international financial services center. It is home to global banking institutions, insurance companies, and aircraft leasing operations. It is deliberately designed to capture financial flows that currently route through Singapore, Dubai, and London. The strategic intelligence here is this: Gujarat is not growing. Gujarat is redirecting global capital architecture. Our projection: Gujarat crosses $1 trillion by 2029-30. Now, we need to spend real time here, because UP is the variable that no international economic model is pricing correctly. 240 million people, let that register. Uttar Pradesh has a larger population than Brazil, larger than Russia, larger than Pakistan. Between 2017 and 2024, UP's GSDP growth rate averaged over 10% in nominal terms. The expressway industrial corridor, connecting Agra, Lucknow, Kanpur, Prayagraj, and Varanasi, is creating a new industrial spine through India's most populous state. The Noida International Airport at Juar, set to be India's largest airport by capacity when fully operational, is the infrastructure anchor for what will become the Delhi NCR extended metropolitan economy. Defense manufacturing, data centers, textile exports, electronics assembly. UP is running multiple parallel industrialization tracks simultaneously, something no large Indian state has attempted at this scale before. Our projection: UP reaches $500 billion by 2028-29 and the $1 trillion threshold by 2034-36, a full decade ahead of where consensus estimates would place it. This isn't just a trend, it is a permanent shift in the global order. And the second-order effects, the geopolitical consequences, the capital reallocation, the institutional recalibration, are only beginning to surface. The IMF has been consistent in its analysis. India's working-age population will continue expanding through 2047, the centenary of its independence. In 2026, India's median age is approximately 28 years. Compare that to China at 39, Germany at 46, Japan at 49. This is not a demographic statistic. It is a macroeconomic force multiplier. Every year that India's working-age population expands, while its elderly dependency ratio remains low, is a year of structural productivity advantage. The World Bank estimates that if India can convert its demographic dividend into skilled labor productivity through vocational training, higher education expansion, and technology adoption, the economic multiplier effect could add an additional $2 trillion to GDP by 2040. The National Education Policy 2020 was not an education reform. It was a human capital investment strategy at civilizational scale. India has built something that no other nation of comparable size has achieved in such a compressed time frame: a unified digital public infrastructure. UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, processed over 130 billion transactions in fiscal year 2023-24. That is more digital transactions than the United States, United Kingdom, and Germany combined. Aadhaar, the biometric identity system, covers over 1.4 billion individuals. DigiLocker has digitized over 6 billion documents. ONDC, the Open Network for Digital Commerce, is a protocol-level disruption of platform monopoly economics. India is not digitizing its economy. India is building a digital operating system for a $10 trillion economy. The second-order effect is this: as this infrastructure matures, the formalization of India's previously informal economy, estimated at 40–50% of GDP, will generate a structural expansion of the tax base, credit penetration, and investable GDP. This is not captured in current growth models, which means current projections are systematically conservative. The geopolitical events of the last 5 years have fundamentally altered the calculus of global supply chain architecture. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fragility of single-source manufacturing concentration. The Russia-Ukraine war accelerated energy and commodity supply chain diversification. The strategic competition between Washington and Beijing has created a structural imperative for allied nations to build alternative production networks. India is the beneficiary of a structural realignment that it did not cause but is strategically positioned to capture. Apple, Samsung, Foxconn, Micron, Renault, Volkswagen. These are not companies making tactical bets on India. They are making structural commitments to India as a manufacturing base for the next 2 to 3 decades. The Production-Linked Incentive Scheme, the PLI, has committed over $26 billion in government incentives to attract manufacturing across 14 sectors. Early data from the Ministry of Commerce suggests that PLI-linked investment has already exceeded $40 billion in private capital commitment. When Apple dictates that its next generation of India-manufactured iPhones will be export-grade products for global markets, it is not making a commercial decision. It is making a geopolitical statement. India is the only major global economy that has maintained functional diplomatic and economic relationships with both the United States and Russia simultaneously. During the Ukraine conflict, India continued purchasing discounted Russian oil, a decision that was criticized in Western capitals but was a textbook exercise in strategic autonomy. India's External Affairs Minister articulated this position with characteristic precision. India's foreign policy is made in India. This is not non-alignment. This is multi-alignment, and it gives India a negotiating leverage that most nations cannot replicate. India is simultaneously a Quad member, a BRICS member, a SCO participant, and the country that hosted the G20 in 2023, crafting a consensus declaration that included both Western allies and the Global South. The second-order effect of this diplomatic architecture: India dictates the terms of its own economic partnerships. No other nation of its size operates with this degree of structural freedom. Here is the question every institutional investor is grappling with in 2026. When multiple Indian states independently cross the $1 trillion threshold, what happens to global capital allocation models? We are about to show you exactly what the structural cascades look like. Here is the second-order effect that almost nobody in mainstream financial media is modeling. India's technology sector, currently valued at over $250 billion in annual revenue with approximately 5.4 million direct employees, is not simply providing services to the world's technological infrastructure. It is increasingly replacing components of it. UPI is being adopted by multiple nations as a payments infrastructure model. Singapore, France, the UAE, and others have established UPI interoperability. India's CoWIN vaccination platform architecture is being studied for adoption across the Global South. Indian technology is no longer a cost-efficient service layer. It is becoming a global infrastructure standard. And the nations that adopt Indian-developed digital public infrastructure are, by definition, integrating their economic systems into India's technological orbit. This is soft power expressed in code, and it is compounding. Let us address the geopolitical counter-narrative directly. The concern among traditional global powers, both Western and Eastern, is not that India is growing. It is that India is growing in a way that resists institutional dependency. India has declined to join trade agreements that it perceives as structurally disadvantageous. It has maintained WTO dispute positions that protect its agricultural and pharmaceutical sectors. It has developed its own defense manufacturing ecosystem, the DRDO and HAL pipeline, to reduce imported military dependency. This institutional autonomy creates friction with powers whose economic leverage historically derived from India's dependency. As that dependency structurally dissolves, the old order institutions face a genuine institutional paralysis. They are not designed for a world where India sets terms. The World Trade Organization, certain Bretton Woods-era financial frameworks, Cold War-era alliance architectures. These institutions are experiencing a structural relevance crisis precisely because the economic actors they were designed to manage are no longer operating within their constraints. India is not dismantling these institutions. India is simply outgrowing their relevance. We are watching, in real time, the most consequential global leadership pivot since the post-World War II reconstruction of the international order. The difference is, this pivot is not being imposed by military force or institutional diktat. It is being executed through compound economic growth and structural supply chain integration. A strategic intelligence report that ignores structural risks is not intelligence. It is propaganda. So let us address the headwinds with the same analytical rigor. Infrastructure gap. Despite massive investment, India's logistics infrastructure, road quality, port capacity, cold chain networks, remains a structural drag on manufacturing competitiveness. The World Bank's Logistics Performance Index ranks India 38th globally. Germany is 3rd, China is 19th. Closing this gap requires sustained capital allocation over a decade. Energy transition risk. India's growth trajectory is currently partially dependent on fossil fuel consumption. As global carbon pricing mechanisms mature and as green supply chain standards become mandatory in Western export markets, India's manufacturing sector will face structural adjustment costs. Educational quality versus quantity. India produces over 1.5 million engineering graduates annually, but the quality distribution is highly uneven. The gap between IIT caliber output and Tier 3 engineering college output represents a structural productivity differential that constrains the pace at which India can absorb and generate high-value economic activity. Water and climate vulnerability. The IMF's own climate risk assessments flag India's agricultural sector, still employing approximately 44% of the workforce, as significantly exposed to climate-driven productivity shocks. This is a macroeconomic risk that is not adequately priced into current growth models. These are real constraints. They do not negate the growth trajectory, but they do define the pace of that trajectory, and a sophisticated strategic actor accounts for them. Let us bring the entire analytical framework to a synthesis. India's $1 trillion state timeline is not a forecast derived from optimism. It is a structural projection derived from compound institutional, demographic, technological, and geopolitical vectors that are simultaneously in their acceleration phase. Maharashtra crosses $1 trillion by 2027-28. It becomes, at that point, the economic equivalent of a medium-tier European nation, operating within India's federal structure, contributing to India's global growth narrative while simultaneously positioning as a standalone investment destination. Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka follow in the 2029-2033 window, driven respectively by capital markets architecture, manufacturing depth, and technology services density. Uttar Pradesh, the structural wildcard, completes the transformation of India's geography of wealth. When UP reaches $1 trillion, the story of India's growth ceases to be a coastal, metropolitan phenomenon. It becomes a continental economic realignment. And here is the ultimate second-order truth that this entire analysis has been building toward. When you have 5 subnational economies, each exceeding $1 trillion operating within a single federal union, sharing a common currency, a common central bank, a common digital infrastructure, you no longer have an emerging economy. You have a macroeconomic superpower, with the geopolitical weight that comes with it. The G7 was constructed in 1975 to coordinate the economic policies of the world's dominant industrial nations. India was not at that table, By the mid-2030s, the analytical question will not be whether India belongs at that table. It will be whether that table has been reconfigured around India. The structural inevitability is not India catching up to the existing global order. It is India redefining what the global order is. We have covered the data, we have covered the drivers, we have covered the second-order cascades. We have given you the framework that the institutional forecasters underweight and the mainstream press systematically ignores. Now I am going to leave you with the question that matters, not as a rhetorical flourish, but as a genuine strategic imperative. How are you positioning for the new global economy that India is building? Are you a professional investor recalibrating your emerging markets exposure? Are you a policy strategist mapping supply chain dependencies? Are you an entrepreneur identifying the sectors where India's growth creates global demand vacuums? Whatever your strategic context, the trillion-dollar state timeline is not an abstract academic exercise. It has direct, measurable implications for capital allocation, for career trajectories, for business strategy, and for geopolitical positioning. The data has spoken. The structural vectors are aligned. The timeline is set. The only remaining variable is your strategic response to it.